Happy February! It's the perfect time to feature work by contemporary Black authors in your book talks, your poetry clip showings, your first chapter Fridays, your book displays, your bulletin boards, and so much more. It's also a good time to look ahead to next school year and consider whether you want to order some of these books for book clubs and whole class texts in the 2025-2026 school year. Of course, I know you know every month is the perfect time to feature these books in all kinds of ways. But since it is February, it's a fun time to talk about 5 authors you might want to highlight, especially right now, and why. As always, you know your classroom best, so be sure to preview books before teaching them to be sure they're the right fit for your students' age and your community. Welcome to the Spark Creativity Teacher Podcast, a podcast for English teachers looking for more creativity, more engagement, more joy, and no more scripted curriculum, lesson planning ruts, or boring book lists. I'm Betsy Potash, and I'm honored you're trusting me to help. You're not alone on this creative journey anymore. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Jason Reynolds' work belongs in every school. I love his mission as he writes it on his website. It's so student-centered. He says he wants to not write boring books, and he sure does it well. If you're new to Jason Reynolds and you teach middle school, I would suggest you start by reading Ghost, which leads into a fantastic series of 4 books. I think the other ones are Lou, Sunny, and Patina. I've read them all. I liked them all pretty much equally, although maybe Ghost is like a teeny tiny bit the best. Now, if you teach 9th and 10th grade, I would suggest you start with Long Way Down, a fantastic book, very possibly a great whole class read for you at some point in the future. It's a verse novel. It is so accessible. Students tend to love it. If you teach older high school students, you could consider Jason Reynolds' nonfiction, Stamped, which is a collaboration with Ibram X. Kendi, or his longer novel, All American Boys, which is, again, a collaboration, this time with Brendan Keeley. He has a lot of cool things working with different artists, different authors, nonfiction, fiction, graphic design. Like he is open to a lot of different interesting collaborations, and that is maybe one of the things that makes him such a fascinating author to feature. I also really love his graphic piece, Ain't Burned All the Bright, which he did with Jason Griffin. And it's a little bit hard to even describe this. It's not like anything else I've ever seen. It's like an extended poem. I believe it's only 4 lines, but it fills an entire book, and it's just, you can't say that it's illustrated by Jason Griffin. You can't exactly say that it's like a graphic novel. It's just a collaboration. It is art, it is words. It tells the story as a combination in a really unique way. So that can be a great add to any classroom library as well. Next up, Angie Thomas. I have liked all of her books so far. I've wished that she could write them even faster. She wrote a lot at once, and then it's kind of slowed down, but I'm hoping she's writing some massive, amazing thing that's going to come out soon. It all started with The Hate You Give, which made such a huge splash years ago, and that is probably still my favorite, although I'm not sure. I also really, really liked On the Come Up. Both of those books, just such powerful stories, such relatable characters, wonderful stories. I also really liked her middle grade novel that she came out with more recently called Nick Blake and the Remarkables. This is a fun story for your middle school library, for your middle school first chapter Friday or book talk, kind of in line with so many middle grade fantasies where kids end up sort of realizing something magical about themselves. My son really enjoyed this. We read it out loud together. It was super fun. Very, very different in some ways from her more high school leaning YA. But that's all to the good. It's fun to have an author with such a wide range. Then there's Nicola Yoon. I've shared about her before. Everything is the first book that I read from Nicola Yoon, and I loved it. It gripped me so much. The plot angle was just shocking for me, and it hooked me from the beginning. And I would have thought that that would always be my favorite novel of hers. But then I read The Sun Is Also a Star, and I liked that one even more, and it felt even more classroomy, if you're going to let me make up that word. In that book, two teens meet in New York City, and one is in this situation where her family is about to be deported like that day. And so there's this incredible time pressure on the relationship between her and this boy that she meets, who decides that they're going to fall in love that day. And the story is all set kind of in that beautiful day, except a little bit at the end that happens later. And it has kind of Romeo and Juliet echoes, but very different also, very contemporary. Just a really lovely read. So if you were going to read anything by Nicola Yoon to consider for the classroom, I think my top recommendation would be The Sun Is Also a Star. I also really liked Everything. Her other book that I've read is Instructions for Dancing. I enjoyed that one a lot too. It has like this little twist of almost like magical realism that threw me for a second, but then I went with it and it was fun and I enjoyed it. And it was like this little peek into this other world of dance and love, of course. So love seems to be a pretty prevalent topic for Nicola Yoon in her YA. And she always approaches it in a radically different way. So they're very creative, even if they are following a little bit of a fairy tale pattern. Okay, next, Kwame Alexander. Wow, he just keeps on creating, keeps on putting out new books, new types of books. He's written children's books, sort of nonfiction children's books in very different styles. He's written the verse novel, The Crossover, which has been so popular. One fun little twist on that is that it was repeatedly rejected by publishing houses under the idea that kids won't like both poetry and sports. Like you'll either like poetry or sports. And so a sports book in verse will never be popular. And it's just so fun how The Crossover has smashed that idea, because it's an incredible book and it's a really popular book. And I can happily recommend it as a fantastic option for a whole class middle school text, or for a first chapter Friday, or a feature book in a display. I think you could still be recommending The Crossover to students for choice reading in high school, especially if they enjoy verse novels or if they're into basketball. I read it for the first time in my 40s and I liked it. So I think high school students can probably enjoy it too. But the main characters who are featured are in middle school. One of my other favorites by Kwame Alexander is his book, How to Read a Book. And it's just this beautiful children's book. Probably I should let it live in my daughter's room, but I keep it in my office and I smile every time I see it. Last but not least, I want to talk up Amanda Gorman. I know you know, she just keeps rocking it. Lately, she's come out with a couple of poems that might be a little bit more under the radar than some of her big smash hits earlier on, but they're so relevant to what's happening right now. And I think there's going to be so relevant to students in that way. There's Smoldering Dawn about the fires in LA, which I found very impactful. And then there's her collaboration with the team at Wicked, which is called Do Us Good. This one was recommended to me the other day by a teacher in Creative High School English, and I ran over to see it immediately at YouTube because I loved Wicked, and the combination of Wicked and Amanda Gorman just seemed like a match made in heaven. And I think, very likely that would be the case for your students as well. If the Wicked fever has hit your classroom, then tying in Amanda Gorman's work isn't going to hurt anything. It would be so easy to fit Amanda Gorman into your curriculum, whether it's with some of her more classic older pieces like The Hill We Climb or New Day's Lyric, or some of these more recent pieces. There's just a lot out there that could tie into different types of essential questions. It could complement different kinds of novels. Or in a poetry unit, of course, you can always feature Amanda Gorman. She's been our youth poet laureate. She, of course, spoke at Biden's inauguration. She's continued to be in the press and in the spotlight as a youth poet who's very successful. And she keeps doing all these interesting kind of social media pieces and collaborations and fundraisers. She really uses her voice to try to affect change and create powerful movements in the world. And so in that way, she's an example of like an influencer who's wielding influence in such positive ways. And so I just think she's, not only is she an author that's wonderful to feature, but really I see her as a role model that's so powerful because she's so young, because she's a writer in the public eye. She's just a really cool person to introduce students to. Okay, so there are 5 wonderful authors to feature now, February, for Black History Month, but really all the time. Their books are amazing. They're poetry, graphic novels, verse novels, all these different types of pieces by these wonderful authors deserve a place on your shelf and your displays and in your curriculum throughout the year. So remember, we talked about Jason Reynolds. Love him so much. Angie Thomas, Nicola Yoon, Kwame Alexander, and of course, Amanda Gorman. Thanks so much for joining me today. Until next time, take care of yourself and stay creative.